As you all know, choosing the right research question is half the battle won. However, most students struggle immensely with this. If your question is problematic in any way, you will end up wasting a lot of time and effort pursuing a path that is fruitless or must be significantly altered. It is therefore much better to spend more time than you want nailing down a good question rather than having to fix it later. In this video, I will be addressing in detail the very important aspects of choosing the right research question. Firstly, we will explore whether a student should undertake a forward-looking or a backward-looking research question. Secondly, I will be giving examples of the different kinds of approaches to questions, such as the should questions, the can questions, the to what extent questions, and how effective questions, with examples of each. And lastly, I will talk about what makes a bad research question so you can avoid making these mistakes. So if you think these kind of videos are useful and you want to know more about IBDP business and economic related topics, click on the subscribe button below to stay updated. Now let's get started. The first question to address is, should I do a forward-looking or a backward-looking question? The subject reports specifically say that students should choose a question that is achievable and forward-looking as opposed to the extended essay, which can be backward-looking. Now, this means that most students' questions will evaluate some future possibility for their business, the future effects of an action, policy, etc., or the merits of an ongoing action or policy. A question may involve an issue that has already begun but carries over the present and or the future. Remember that there is a 3-year limit on the sources for the SL and HLIA. A student may not use resource material that is dated more than 3 years before their IA submission. Now let's explore some examples of good questions. The first could be, should Nintendo stop making rated M games and focus on M-rated friendly games? Second, should Alphabet acquire a smart TV manufacturer? Third could be, should Walmart try to expand the variety of products offered under the Great Value brand? You could also look at a question like, will third-party delivery apps be a greater source of revenue for the bagel chain than catering to large events? And so on. All of these questions narrow the firm's options down to a clear set of options that can be addressed adequately within the word limit. So now let's look at the should questions. For most students, I often find that the should questions end up being the easiest, and students generally prefer these questions because they can narrow their focus into a scenario which they can apply to their course, their tools, using their techniques and theories. And it tends to be simple, giving you a binary choice of either a yes or a no, or an option A or an option B. The second type are the can questions. Now this is very similar to the should questions in the sense that the answer is clearly either going to be a yes or a no. Now let me give you an example. For example, can the Walnut Grove Road Exxon franchise successfully increase the revenues by adding electric car charging ports? Now let's look at the third kind, that are the to what extent questions. Now another option is going to be to what extent. For instance, to what extent is the product line, marketing campaign, strategy, so on, going to impact the firm in a positive way, say the productivity, competitive advantage, etc. And while the conclusion could be a little more fuzzy than it could be in a should question, it is still pretty straightforward to conclude if the answer is to a limited extent, moderate extent, to a great extent. And lastly, the how effective questions. Now, as long as it addresses an issue that is ongoing and not solely in the past, this could be a good way of evaluating the merits of a firm's objectives, strategies, tactics, and so on. I hope this was clear. Now let's explore what makes a bad question, and trust me, this is important. There are many things that can lead to a bad research question, but there are a few things I commonly see in students' first iteration of their questions. One, either the question is way too broad, it considers too many aspects of the business's functions, for example, HR, business, strategy, or they talk about the industry as a whole and not just the firm, or probably it requires some amount of data which the student has no access to, or probably the question has already been answered, or the question is irrelevant. Also, sometimes a question may have a very obvious answer. Now, let me give you some examples of unusable questions I've seen before, and trust me, this will be fun. First, how did the transgender bathroom policy impact Target's profits? Firstly, I doubt you're ever going to be able to prove whether or not it had any impact whatsoever. Moreover, the way the student has phrased this question is entirely in the past. If the student wants to actually investigate whether it will have any ongoing or future impact on the business, then it should be rephrased. How has the world of aviation changed in the United States since the attacks in 9/11? Way too far in the past and too broad and not even about a specific firm. Let's do one more. What impact will the recent move of Wilson Sporting Goods headquarters have on the mobility of jobs within the workforce of the company? Now, this is a mouthful. I'm not even entirely sure what the student means by mobility of jobs within the workforce of the company. And I'm sure the student also clearly had no idea when we chatted. Let's do one more. How can Wendy's revamp the public's outlook on the service and attitude of the staff? Now, firstly, I generally advise against questions beginning with how. Too often there are far too many possibilities to explore, so a how question is too broad to be covered well within the word limit. Now, secondly, the student is assuming that Wendy has a problem with the public perception of the service and attitude of the staff. Now, in this case, the student has never been able to come up with reliable data showing that there were even any problems to begin with. One more? Yeah, one more? Okay. Should Amazon invest in private label brands? Now, they already do so probably the question is just irrelevant. Yeah, one more. Should Sony expand its electronic sales into new markets? Now, Sony is a huge company and I don't know what market they would potentially get into that they're not currently in. Also, does the student mean geographical markets, new product markets, etc.? But the student was never really able to answer these questions specifically. Okay, one more. What new features can Spotify add to better compete with Apple Music? Now, maybe this could work if it were more specific, but the student wasn't really very clear about what options he had in mind. And consequently, without narrowing it down to specific features or at least types of features, the question was too broad and wasted a lot of students' time before he switched. Now, if a student has a more specific kind of a how question, though it could be workable, for instance, how could local firm X reduce its monthly fixed costs? Now, this may be workable because there are not too many options to explore for the specific firm in question. I hope this has given you a good head start to work around your internal assessment. Now, I understand how hard this journey can be sometimes, and the supervisors just give feedback on an occasional basis, but are not really part of the process in the journey. And this journey can get lonely, and you may need someone to just bounce off ideas with, and somebody who can help you and provide you some clarity and brainstorm with. Don't worry, you can DM me and I will help you, mentor you through this entire journey, and most importantly, make it a lot of fun. Stay tuned for more tips on how to make your IA amazing. This is Anirisha signing off.